Welcome back to the BioBlast podcast. I'm Devin Zeidelman, Director of Scientific Real Estate Advisory Services with Scheer Partners. I have the pleasure of hosting Chandra Briggman, the President and CEO of Activation Capital based in Richmond, Virginia. Chandra, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Devin.
So before we jump into Activation Capital and all things Richmond and the greater Virginia region, would really love to understand your background and career journey. You spent a lot of time in Boston, Cambridge. You have affiliations with Venture Café and MIT. And so would love to understand how you ended up where you are today with Activation Capital.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for the invite, Devin. As you noted, I've been president and CEO of Activation Capital for just under 4 years. And I was recruited out of the Boston, Cambridge market back in June of 2020 to take the helm of Activation Capital, which is based here in Richmond, Virginia. But before I get into my background, I wanted to explain Activation Capital a little bit, and then I'll
Sure.
talk about my journey to how I got here. So Activation Capital, just to dispel any misinformation, Activation Capital is not a venture capital firm. Activation Capital is our trade name, and it represents 3 assets. The first being the Virginia Biotechnology Research Partnership Authority, which is a 30-plus-year-old independent authority of the Commonwealth. The second being the Virginia Biotechnology Park Corporation, a 501c3 nonprofit that's focused on regional ecosystem development and regional entrepreneurship. And the third asset is the Bio Plus Tech Park itself, which is a 34-acre urban park located in the city center part of downtown Richmond. And it's home to 2,000 employees and 70 plus companies. So my job is to oversee all of those assets in order to help grow the regional economy. And one thing I will note about our organization, because part of it was created by the Commonwealth of Virginia, is that it's different than a traditional state agency in that we're self-sustaining, we're self-funded, and we can talk about that a little bit later, but we're funded by our real estate practice. So in terms of my journey, I was recruited from the Boston, Cambridge ecosystem, where I worked for Venture Café as director. Venture Café Cambridge was the flagship location for a global network of ecosystem development organizations that sat in the center of ecosystems around the globe and acted as a convener, providing connective tissue between the various stakeholders that create a vibrant ecosystem. And it's tech agnostic. And so we traverse between life sciences, robotics, fintech, you name it. Boston is a pretty dense ecosystem, one that folks travel to from around the globe to understand how to build them. And so we had the opportunity and the privilege to interface with a whole gambit of experts, from researchers to inventors to funders and entrepreneurs, and a whole host of industries and sectors in the Boston, Cambridge area.
Yeah, it's a great background overview. Obviously, a lot of value from your experience and perspective. And so, again, being in Richmond and having sort of that benchmark against Boston, which is generally considered to be one of the top hubs for life science and biotechnology in the country, if not the world. And so when we think about ecosystem building, it's really looking at talent, access to workforce, access to capital, facilities, and I always draw a blank on the fourth, of course, when we're talking, but also thinking about just sort of the IP, that where are the ideas coming from, and MIT and certainly Harvard are core drivers of that. So how do you think about an ecosystem and the strengths of an ecosystem?
Yeah, so one of the answers I give when people ask me the difference between a Boston and any market, let alone a Richmond market, and it's hard to answer to one extent because it's so baked. They've been at it so long, but this role, when I shifted from that larger market to the Central Virginia market, it helped me take a step back to really analyze what are the elements at play and what makes it work. And so what I would say is the number one thing is just this commitment to innovation and entrepreneurship, like this spirit and culture around invention and problem solving. I think as humans, we have an innate desire to solve problems. I think we all have the ability to be inventors and potentially entrepreneurs, because I think we problem solve quite naturally. But I think that culture is very important. One of the things that I noted when I lived and worked in the Boston area is that even at the elementary, middle school, high school level, students are being introduced to entrepreneurship. And when you think about like the innovation economy in Boston, it's massive, right? So at every level, I think there's been a commitment to fostering the sense of problem solving and invention. And then there are tools that have been developed across the continuum from research to maturing companies, across the education continuum from elementary school, as I said, to colleges and universities and even beyond. So I think that's very important. The other is this desire to be collaborative and work together to solve bigger problems, because one single individual and sometimes a single organization cannot solve some of the more complex problems we're facing as humanity. So this idea that you can combine the resources and assets of others and work together toward a goal is something I think is quite prominent in Boston. And to make another point, this risk-taking part of the entrepreneurship world and startup world is something very prominent also in the ecosystem. But beyond that, you're going to find universities, community college, funders of all types. So it's VCs, but it's also foundations who are contributing to the entrepreneur ecosystem and ensuring that companies have the resources to launch and scale. You're going to also find corporations are a big part of the ecosystem in the Boston, Cambridge region. In fact, I built programs just around corporate innovation to help them solve their corporate problems by engaging with the startup community. So the very important part of the ecosystem as well. So all these things kind of come together, giving people permission to innovate and not penalizing them for making mistakes, but rewarding them for iterating is something that you find embedded in the culture in the Boston, Cambridge region.
Yeah. And so as you think about Richmond and really your role in activation capital, hitting a lot of those themes that you've just sort of described and what you did in Boston. We talked a little bit earlier about, how Richmond is sort of a nascent ecosystem in terms of the life science and biotechnology space. I mean, you have a lot of strong assets, a lot of strong university presence with VCU and their new medical campus. But with the emergence of Richmond and your goal to, take it further in that, what are some of the risks that you're trying to mitigate and, some of the reasons that you're bullish about the market?
So some of the risk, I think, number one is individualism. Again, the point I made about collaboration and its role in helping to solve big problems is very, very important. And so one of the risks that we have to overcome is selling and continue to sell this notion that together we can solve bigger problems. Together, our assets can be transformational and globally impactful in ways that an individual organization or an individual company cannot. So I would say this desire to sort of be too independent as we think about global competitiveness is one of the risks that we have to overcome. I think that Richmond has a brand outside of Richmond that it needs to overcome. And when I first arrived, I was surprised at the number of assets that are there, at the talent that's there. And sometimes I think that image is not breaking through the national image of Richmond, Virginia. That's another challenge. And we don't have all of the investment dollars or the capital that you see in more mature markets. And I'm sure you hear this in a lot of regions. But again, particularly as we pursue bold ambitions around life sciences, that that's a complex, long, capital-intense journey for the individual companies. And as we try to knit them together in specialized life sciences community, there needs to be significant capital infusions, into the future in order for us to be a competitive market. I mean, I could go on for an hour about the risk, but I think those are the biggest risks. So thinking about the region as one versus individual organizations, and staying committed to the journey, because it's going to be complex, it's going to be capital intense, but it will yield the results.
Yeah. And so your role as a CEO, a lot of it is thinking about the capital components of, sort of the stack that you have in developing the ecosystem and facilities as well, which I want to talk about more within regards to your innovation center. But, Activation Capital has been the beneficiary of over $100 million of growth capital. The governor of Virginia, Youngkin, just announced the VIPC-led initiative to invest another $250 million in private investment. And so, what has been your approach to fundraising as a sort of a economic development type of entity, which is challenging, I think, certainly, and secondarily to that, what do you think is needed in the ecosystem in terms of that capital investment?
Yeah, so one correction, and then I'll explain. So Activation Capital, as I noted, is a self-sustaining organization. So for operating the organization, I have to go out and fundraise. So we have the real estate base as our initial revenue channel, and we still have that today as we expand, and we'll talk about that in a second, to a new space that not only gives us a broader platform for the entrepreneurs, it's going to give us a broader revenue base. So Activation Capital, for its operation, we're approaching $50 million that we've raised in the last just under 3 years for the operation. In terms of what we do for being a conduit for attracting outside funding for the region, we have helped garner over $100 million for the advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing cluster. The beautiful part of that story is that outside of our work, the individual members of that alliance has come together to scale up the advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing cluster in the region. There is something like over $900 million that have been attracted to the region for those public and private organizations to do their work in scaling up the region. And while that may seem impressive, just under $1 billion, the work that we're doing is focused on reshoring the manufacturing of medicines from regions like China and India. And they've invested untold billions of dollars to not only recruit, but retain that business in their country. So we are celebrating the fact that we've garnered just under $1 billion just for that cluster work alone, together as a collaborative. I think we still have a ways to go in order for that to truly be a globally competitive hub in Central Virginia. In terms of the approach for funding the organization and this regional initiative and others, because there are others that we've helped garner funding for, it's just as comprehensive and deep, and turning over every stone is what I like to say to my team, because again, they're funding at the state level, but it's not going to be enough. There's funding at the federal level. That alone is not going to be enough. Philanthropic investments as well. So the combination of them both, I think, will help us get to a place of momentum and validating that there's a there. And hopefully we end up creating this flywheel of investment where others will begin to relocate and invest by having a presence in the market. But I think it's important for these initial seed investments, if you will, to happen across a broad selection of funding categories.
Yeah, and so you have a lot of engagement with the public sector in the Commonwealth. And so can you just speak to a little bit about that interaction and the support that you've garnered from the state?
Yeah, so first I'd like to say there have been a number of who I call luminaries in the life sciences sector in the Commonwealth who've been working at this for decades. So I relocated 4 years ago, and so I'm just picking up the mantle. But there are some folks who've been at it for decades. So what I would say is we've seen a commitment come from the Virginia Bio Organization, which is the state's trade association for the life sciences sector. They were able to garner about $3 million through a state grant to launch an initiative called BioConnect. And that was launched, I think, about 4 years ago, right around the time that I came on board. And what that initiative was able to do was connect the disparate activity that was happening in 5 regions across the Commonwealth and have them under one umbrella, just providing connective tissue and a forum for knowledge sharing between the folks who were leading life science initiatives. So that was catalytic a few years ago. The governor 2 years ago appropriated about $56 million to a few regions working in the bioscience on very disparate activity, but still an infusion in the life sciences sector. And then in his budget that he announced in December, he committed about $100 million to bolster research in the life sciences sector in 3 regions. And they're the 3 regions that have the most momentum in terms of sponsored research. It's the Richmond, Petersburg region, Charlottesville region, and the Blacksburg, Roanoke region. And so that budget, I think, is in its final stages of formation now, but those dollars remain in that, and that will be an important booster for the Commonwealth. And then just yesterday, as you and I talked about, the governor announced a $250 million initiative to bring catalytic venture capital and investment dollars that's needed for emerging and growth startups across a number of different sectors, including the bioscience sector. So those investments from the state, I think, send the right signal. They're absolutely supportive of the work that I do in entrepreneur support. They're supportive of the entrepreneurs, but I think it sends a signal to the broader nationwide and global community about the Commonwealth of Virginia and the fact that we take this sector seriously and we have a lot of assets that we're prepared to apply to it in order to be competitive.
Yeah, and speaking of assets, you all have announced plans a little bit ago, but for the Innovation Center, and you guys will operate a 102,000 square foot center within the biotech park in downtown. 45,000 square feet of that will be a dedicated incubator, and 35,000 square feet would be looking at creative office and lab, Class A lab. So, that's a really important part of this puzzle, right? As we think about sort of the pixels that make up the larger vision or picture of what Richmond is and what it will become in the future. And so, where are you with the Innovation Center in terms of progress? Is there anything that you can share further just in terms of what folks can expect in terms of that being, kind of ready to walk into?
Yeah, if you allow me to back up just one level before I
Sure.
talk about the Innovation Center and talk about the 3 ways that activation capital interfaces with the ecosystem. The first is ecosystem development. So that is helping to create the conditions for our regional ecosystem to congeal and be successful. So that could be anything from policy to programming. That's where that advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing work that we just talked about sits, is creating this environment where we can broaden our portfolio of innovation and entrepreneurship. And we have a couple other initiatives under that category. The second is space making. So we've talked about the biotech park being this 32-acre park downtown. So space making, particularly for deep tech, is very important because you have specialized space and equipment that these entrepreneurs and innovators need in order to build, launch, scale companies in the region. And so the biotech park and this new innovation center are an important part of it. And a third leg of our strategy is the programming, which is also an important part of how we're designing this new innovation center. And there, again, we're focused on deep tech with a particular focus on the health and life sciences company support that's needed from a programmatic standpoint. But this project, this innovation center, is important for us because we're out of lab space, and we've been out of lab space for quite a while. I've been on board now for 4 years, and when I came on board, I asked the team to start keeping a list of companies that are coming for tours and are in need of space. And we've just been logging them because we are out of capacity. Every once in a while, we'll have a space or two that will come open, but they get immediately leased. And so we have a need to make sure that we have space for emerging companies that are spinning out of VCU, for example, that are relocating to come and co-locate with the work that we're doing in the advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing cluster and others. The other need is companies that are scaling. The footprint that we have right now is really designed for emerging companies that have 3 to 4 employees. As some of those are growing, those companies are growing, they have no graduate space. Right. So the Innovation Center represents, first and foremost, an opportunity for us to address the acute need for lab space in the region. The second thing is having this home where you can have an ecosystem in a building. And this is something that I learned and helped grow and nurture in the Boston, Cambridge region, which is having the emerging companies, growth companies, large scale companies, some of the support organizations all in one space is an important ecosystem where you're increasing the proximity. And when you increase that proximity, you're going to increase the probability of entrepreneurship and innovation being sparked or being catalyzed out of that space. So we're conceived of this new innovation center as one of these ecosystem style projects. But because we're downtown Richmond, we've also thought about the local community. We don't want to create an ivory tower that is sitting in the middle of downtown Richmond, adjacent to the Jackson Ward community, which is one of the first Black Wall Street communities in the United States, and having them not have an opportunity to participate. So part of how we've designed this project is to have community space for training, a K through 12 training lab for students to come in and be exposed to some of these concepts as we think about a pipeline being created around the bioscience and life science talent in the region. And one thing that we're in need of downtown in City Center is food options. So if you drive through the park today, it looks like a ghost town, but there's a lot of people working behind those walls, but they don't have any place to walk to for lunch. There's no housing downtown. There's no grocery downtown. So this first project is going to help us provide some of those lunch opportunities where, again, we're trying to create collision points for these innovators that are already there, 2,000 people that are already there. So activating that first floor with some food options, it addresses an obvious need for lunch, but also another opportunity to connect innovators in and around the biotech park.
Yeah, those organic collisions are so important, especially when you have like-minded individuals, growing companies, scaling companies, thinking about synergies. And, you've been very dedicated to creating that diverse, equitable ecosystem within Richmond. So, kudos to you for really thinking intentionally about that and thinking strategically about that in terms of future growth. We have really set ourselves up to be a partner with the city. The city has designs for an innovation district. It's gotten approved by the city council. And I think it's important for us to think about the 16-hour day, which is something I'm sure you're very, very familiar with. And we want the park to transition from being just a place to work. Right. But if we're going to attract the talent to downtown city center, we're going to have, as I said, these food options. These folks are typically want to walk or bike to work. So we got to think holistically about like what that experience needs to be downtown and city center in order for it to be successful. So we have the first stages of that plan, developed, and we're hopeful that with our project coming out of the ground this year, we'll see some momentum gather around city center. Yeah, and the community is such an asset, as you mentioned. And so where do you think, for lack of a better way of saying this, where do you think you need some help? Like, where can you lean into specific partnerships or strategic ventures that you think would bolster the ecosystem that maybe isn't present today? I know it's a big question. How
much time do you have? I would say at every level of our three-pronged strategy, ecosystem building, space making, and place making, by the way, not just space making, place making, and venture development, we aggressively pursue partnerships. So we've talked about the public and private partnership around the advanced pharmaceutical cluster. We've built a robust team around the actual physical space that we're trying to create. But when we think more broadly about space making, we would love to have partnerships with folks who want to build housing and who want to bring grocery and who want to bring other amenities to downtown. So while we don't control all of City Center, I mean, that is the city's project, we do have this 34-acre park, which is our platform for how we can be catalytic about placemaking in downtown Richmond. So we invite partners for that. And in our third category in venture development, we are about to launch an initiative called Frontier BioHealth, which is our deep training for deep tech companies focused on health and biosciences. And we're partnered with a couple notable national partners, Generator, FedTech Studio, among them, to help us bring best practices and best practice thinking to how we're shaping our programming. But we invite others. So you and I talked earlier about this Project Vital that is imminently going to be announced, and it's a partnership between Activation Capital, Seville BioHub, and Verge Alliance out in Blacksburg. And that partnership is to build from the ground up momentum around bioscience and help create a more comprehensive continuum of support for these entrepreneurs. And that's going to be a tremendous opportunity for public and private partners to come along and help us in partnership with the universities and the health systems think about how we level up from research all the way to mature companies, the bioscience space. So there's plenty of opportunity to partner with Activation Capital in our work.
Yeah. So you heard it here. If you're interested in plugging in, I think, Chandra has opened her arms and made herself available to really everyone that would be interested in supporting and plugging into this developing ecosystem within Richmond. And, I think Virginia in general, it's a pretty large state when you think about just sort of not necessarily the silos, but sort of the different areas of focus and kind of creating that larger, biotech triangle, if you will. But, I think the way that you're approaching it with Seville BioHub, who we think tremendously of, with Nikki Hastings leading that effort and really building a tremendous organization down there in Charlottesville. But you all have been very collaborative. And so I think that really goes a long way in building out the cluster and thinking about it just within the lens of, for comparison purposes, I live in DC. And so, regional collaboration is something that I think is really important. And sometimes, you have a little bit of competition and co-opetition. So with that being said, being a community leader, how important is the Richmond community to you and your team?
So thank you for this question. So when I tell people that I relocated from Boston, Cambridge, they assume that, I was born and raised there and have always lived in major metros. I actually was born and raised in South Carolina, in a very small town, 2,000 person, small. And, but my career has had me work primarily in major metros. And when I initially got the call from a recruiter about this role in Virginia, I was a little hesitant. But then I thought about my upbringing. I thought about that 2,000 person town and how today it's mostly shuttered. And these smaller towns and smaller regions who live and die by whether a new plant is going to move in or whether it's going to shut down. And so as I reflected on the opportunity, outside of seeing a lot of great assets, what I also saw was an opportunity for me to create a model for how do you build a vibrant ecosystem, smaller footprint in a smaller region, and have it be successful and have it be self-sustaining and have it not collapse the way I saw my little small town, did to some extent. And so Richmond to me is both an opportunity and a privilege to serve people that look and have needs similar to those that I grew up with. And I will be delighted if I'm successful at fashioning a model for a smaller region that can be replicated, because there are more towns that look like Richmond than Boston. Yeah. And so that's what it means to me. I would be delighted to be a part of the work that could help design that model that could be replicated. And for my team, what I would say is I've built a team of innovators who love to build things. We are mission focused. individuals. My team is highly curated. You can take a look at their bios.
Yeah.
Mission focused individuals. And I think we are all builders and want to see newness and vibrancy come out of our work that's lasting. And so it's a privilege for us to do this work.
Yeah. And so within that lens, you all have been nominated for the BioBuzz Awards as a finalist. And so what does that mean to you to be recognized by your peers in the larger Mid-Atlantic region for that designation?
Well, so I'm honored because little old Activation Capital, tucked away in the sleepy biotech park in downtown Richmond, it was a surprise, but an honor because I saw the other folks who were nominated. But again, we believe in science and technology and its ability to drive humanity forward. I'm personally motivated by understanding human nature and how we can do that with science and technology, and so. I am, I have profound admiration and awe for individuals and organizations who are not only advancing our understanding of the living world, but who are improving it through science and technology. And so my team and I are delighted to be among those who are nominated. And again, we see it as a privilege to do this work. And so we are appreciative.
Yeah, well, it's been a privilege having the conversation with you today, Chandra, and a privilege as well. We're so delighted and to see your growth as a leader, and 4 years Activation Capital, all you've accomplished to date, and what you will accomplish tomorrow and the days to follow. So thanks so much for joining us on BioBlast today.
Thank you, Devin.